And to discuss the current state of the NATO-Turkey relationship, I'm joined in the studio by Emre Ersen. He's a professor at Marmara University's Department of Political Science and International Relations, as well as Matthew Bryza, who is a former US diplomat and the former US ambassador to Azerbaijan. Let's begin with you, Matthew. Is NATO still a relevant force?
Extremely so. I mean, NATO is the most successful military or political military alliance in history.
In the past?
Yeah, but still, today, as we speak, NATO is essential to returning stability where? To Syria. It's part of the coalition in Syria and Ukraine, which are two of the biggest concerns on the global agenda today.
You know why I ask you that question? Because 67% of people polled in Turkey, across Turkey, in 12 provinces across Turkey, believe that Turkey can handle its security needs without NATO. In other words, it doesn't need NATO. Emre?
I can understand why people said that because of what's going on in Turkey's relations with the United States and the European Union. But when it comes to NATO, I think we always need to remember that this is really a very long-standing relationship between Turkey and NATO. Turkey has been a member of this alliance since 1952. It has a veto power there, and it is one of the most important members of the NATO alliance still. So I can understand because of what's going on currently in these relations with the United States, the people might feel a little bit disappointed. But apart from that, I think when you take it strategically, I think that behavior can also change very in a very short time. As what happened with Russia 2 years ago, the same Turkish public was against any type of cooperation with Russia because of the crisis in Turkish-Russia relations. So these can change, but what we have to keep in mind is that this is a very long-standing relationship, a very strategic relationship.
A strategic relationship, but you mentioned Syria, you mentioned a few other things. Russia, Turkey, as Emre mentioned, it's a possibility and it's a reality now with what's happening in Syria. So, again, strategic alliance?
Well, you mean between Turkey and Russia? No, I don't think so.
Not between Turkey and NATO.
Of course. That's the core of Turkey's national security, regardless of public opinion that may be anti-Western a bit for known reasons. The core of Turkey's national security interests are addressed by NATO. It's the most successful alliance in history. It can bring to bear anywhere in the world greater force than has ever been applicable to any problem. But it's also a democratic force. It's a force that brings stability by encouraging democratic change as well, and it's defensive. So I don't think Turkey is tilting toward Russia in a strategic way. I think it's tactical, and understandably, Ankara is saying, Washington, wake up, we're valuable.
So the S-400 system and the purchase of that, or potential purchase of that by Turkey, it's a tactical thing, Emre?
Well, I think, when you take a look at this debate of the S-400 deal between Turkey and Russia, it has two dimensions. One of them is technical, and which is tactical, of course. And Turkey needs this system because of what's going on in Syria. It's very important to strengthen Turkey's national defense.
But my question is, why couldn't Turkey get similar systems from NATO member states, Matthew?
Well, yeah, number one, Turkey is going to pursue a European manufactured system to kind of counterbalance politically the Russian one. But number two, the key point is that Russia apparently has said Turkey can co-produce this missile system. So Turkey can get these systems elsewhere. The S-400 is a very capable system. But obtaining the technology, that's something that no one else was offering but the Russians.
Let's talk about the relationship itself. Recently, we saw a spat where certain NATO member states were accused of using the pictures of the Turkish founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's target practice in a video simulation of sorts. How does that talk about the relationship? What does that tell us?
Well, the timing of that incident was definitely very unfortunate because at a time when the public is actually against NATO and Turkey's relations with NATO, this actually came at a very unfortunate time. And I think it's very important that all the NATO officials and the Norwegian officials immediately apologize. So it's very clear that this was not intentional. So there was a mismanagement, and I think Turkey also needs to see it this way. But of course, when it comes to the public mood, it's really definitely created a huge disappointment in the Turkish public about NATO, especially at a time when everybody is actually questioning the nature of that relationship.
It's an interesting parallel because on the one hand, Turks are questioning the relationship, but so are the Americans, especially the US administration, with Donald Trump saying, I'm going to cut NATO funding, cut NATO financing, threatening, using that as a threat against European countries. So something to bring the two countries together?
No, I don't think so. I think President Trump has changed his tune quite a bit on NATO. His visit there back in the early summer really kind of, I think, helped him appreciate how valuable the alliance is. And frankly, I mean, the U.S.-Turkish relations now are on a very negative trajectory, and I think something needs to be done to change the way the two countries' governments communicate to each other. The typical bureaucratic mechanisms, of which I was a part, are not working.
It's quite interesting that all these issues kind of seem to be converging. What's Turkey's play then, Emre?
Well, Turkey is trying to strike the perfect balance between Russia and the Western allies, as it always has done. When you take a look at the traditional Turkish foreign policy, it's always been about this balance, actually. And there were times when Turkish-United States relations were in a crisis back in the 1960s, 70s. So crisis is not something new in Turkish-United States relations or in Turkish-Russian relations. And I think Turkish government is also quite reasonable to know that this is the case. So sometimes people think that Turkey is actually trying to make a strategic alliance with Russia or with another country. I don't think that's the case. I think they are actually trying to use this as a tactical move in order to strengthen their strategic relations with their traditional Western partners. Because when it comes to securing Turkey's interests in the Middle East even, NATO is much more efficient than Russia or any other option.
And going on both your points, NATO is still a relevant force as far as Afghanistan is concerned, contrary to what I was saying earlier, with ISAF troops stationed in Afghanistan as well as the former Yugoslavia and Syria as well as trainers, as Matthew, you were mentioning earlier. So still an opportunity for NATO to be relevant, Matthew.
Yes, of course. I think NATO is going to be relevant to Turkey itself, as far as we can see into the future. If you look at what it means to be Turkish, a Turk's identity, it's partially European. Again, the sort of the center of the Ottoman Empire in many ways was in the Balkans. Being Turkish means to be somewhat Middle Eastern, and it means to be somewhat from the Caucasus, somewhat Black Sea focused, but it is never meant to be Russian. And Turkey's fought more wars against Russia than against any other country dating back to the Ottoman times, and it never worked out so well.
So, but they're still collaborating in Syria, Turkey and Russia. Tell us a little bit about the NATO presence in Syria as well.
Well,
Emre.
of course, NATO is there. Like most of the NATO countries are there. I mean, they have been active in Syria. Like Russia, like Turkey, everybody actually wants to fight the ISIS. This is the greatest threat that everyone sees there. So, and you should also keep in mind that Turkey has been an active collaborator in this international coalition that was founded by the United States. What Turkey is doing there is trying to keep an equal distance with all the parties, and I don't think this is something that we can criticize when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Russia, and when it comes to all the NATO countries, especially the United States.
Thank you so much, Matthew Bryza, Emre Ersen.